Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 362 of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, where I'm happy to announce my continuation of my ongoing Doing Compliance Masterclass series that I'm doing in 2018 with Jonathan Marks from Markham LLC. We are going to be next in Miami, Florida, and I will shortly have dates available for you. So if you're in the South Florida, this will be the class for you to learn about doing compliance under the new Department of Justice's FCPA corporate compliance policy. Today I have with me Brian Platz. Brian is a well-known entrepreneur and disruptor. His latest company is called Fluree, and Fluree is a company that does blockchain work in the healthcare space, but the work that he and his company are doing have lots of implications for the anti-corruption compliance practitioner. He talks about scalable blockchain for database, and we tie that to transparency and consensus as key attributes of blockchain. This is one of my continuing series of entrepreneurs who are bringing blockchain into compliance. This is going to be an incredibly important tool for you going forward. So I'm trying to bring as many different views on blockchain to you so that you will be ready when your company is ready to step up and take the step to move to blockchain and compliance. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions. Also, I wanted to let you know about a special one-week podcast series that is running the week of December 18th. Jay Rosen and I did a 5-part podcast series entitled May the Podcast Be With You. It is on the intersection of Star Wars and compliance. It's short, about 10 to 12 minutes each day. It releases at noon each day, and it will certainly give you some compliance tips, techniques, and tools in the context of Star Wars movie in honor of the latest entry, The Last Jedi. And now, Brian Platz. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again for another episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today, I have with me fellow Michigan State Spartan, Brian Platz, the co-CEO of Fluree. It is a blockchain company. It's a public benefit corporation that has introduced scalable blockchain database for decentralized applications. And I know that may sound like a whole lot for a lawyer or a compliance practitioner to digest, but Brian is going to explain to us what blockchain is, and more importantly, how the concepts that he and Fluree have developed relate directly to the compliance practitioner and how we practice compliance going forward. So Brian, with that introduction, thank you very much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thanks so much, Tom. I'm really pleased to be here and be able to speak to your audience.
So I was wondering if you might tell us what Fluree is and what you guys do.
Sure. So Fluree is a relatively new company. Relatively new. We've been working on this for approximately 3 years, developing some of this technology. But it's all about enabling applications to be decentralized. And really a center point of that is how we leverage blockchain technology. And I guess before we talk about blockchain, just our interest in this is we have been building substantial enterprise software companies for 30 plus years, and we got really excited about the impact that we felt blockchain was going to have in so many areas of business, and certainly compliance is a huge area of that. So we took this opportunity to really focus on technology we thought could assist businesses in helping to take advantage of it. So our passion is really kind of business software, and we really see this having a big impact on where things are headed.
So one of the things that really has struck me about blockchain, well, actually several things, but in the compliance space, it is creating a transparent, yet, I love this word, immutable, basically documentation that can be read by a variety of persons. It can be read by the compliance practitioner. It can be read by your third parties. It can be read by contracting counterparties. It can be read by regulators if they come knocking. It can be read by other stakeholders. But it gives you a way to really attest to the information that you put in, whatever that information may be, with little or no chance that it can be changed or manipulated going forward. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you do have that right. And, we have some variations on that theme, which I hope we get a chance to talk to, like composite blockchain consensus that do some variations there. But absolutely, the idea is that these blocks are chained together, and they're chained together because each one actually depends on data in the one before it. And therefore, if you were trying to alter any information in any one of those blocks that came before it, you would have to, in effect, alter or manipulate every piece of information that came after it, because they're all linked, essentially. And that, along with the idea that it is being run independently, provide this high level of trust in this, immutability word, which is you can't really change the data that sits in there. This is being used for everything from, simple time stamping of data, because if you log something into the database, you can actually show, or into the blockchain, you can show that it was absolutely there at that time. There's no way it wasn't. And all the blocks that came after kind of reinforce that data was there. Or it's used to share information across organizations without anyone controlling it. And those are really the two main benefits, this immutability and this idea of consensus and trust, in that it's not controlled by any single entity.
Brian, what I had not fully appreciated about blockchain was how the data in an individual block actually relates to, or is even tied to, the data in the block in front of it, and sounds like in the block behind it. Is that concept what is meant by the term scalable blockchain?
Well, that concept would be the tying of the blocks together is really about cryptography and cryptographic hashes. So it sounds really foreign. It's actually a pretty simple idea, which is if you take all of the characters, the text, it could be other things, could be an image or something like that, but just think of it like a document. And if you took all the words in a document together and you ran it through some algorithm, it comes out with a short string of characters. And the idea is that algorithm, if you changed even one letter in that original document, the short string of characters would come out differently. And this is what allows you, when you reinforce these blocks, to know exactly what was in a single block. Because if you take a look at the content, and if you run it through the same algorithm, if it doesn't come up with the same result, you know that something was altered. And then how the blocks are actually chained together is that when each block is being created, it just includes that encryption string of the previous block with it as part of its new block of characters. And therefore, it creates this chain that you really cannot change whatsoever.
So I come out of, after I went to Michigan State, I went down the road to Ann Arbor to go to law school. So I've been a lawyer for a while. And obviously one of the I would see key uses of blockchain is in contract and contract negotiations, so that when you put a contract forward, you know what's in it. If it changed through negotiations, that would be in the next block, and then your final draft that's agreed upon could be yet in a third block. And I see this as a great way for companies to understand and manage their contract process. But that's just one very simple application of it. You see it in a variety of other ways, and I was wondering if you might talk about the uses of blockchain in the healthcare space.
Sure. So, an example of one of the things that we talk about in healthcare, which I think applies to all kinds of industries, and in particular around compliance, it's the idea that blockchain makes it easier to share cross-organizational compliance. And it's something I don't think we have a lot of today. Certainly when we focus on compliance and auditing in standards, a lot of it is within an organization. And sometimes, through the use of SSA 18 or something might extend to some of your service providers like that. But by bringing visibility into compliance across multiple organizations, I think they can work together to enforce compliance as a whole. And around healthcare, an example we've used is this problem with counterfeit drugs. So in especially some developing companies, as much as 30% of the drugs being distributed are counterfeit. Well, if all the organizations, including the original drug manufacturer and the various people in that supply chain, were able to collaborate and log each step of the drug production and where it ended up going to, anyone would be able to verify the provenance of a particular product that they received. So, if there was a batch of sort of 1,000 kilos of a drug made, and 1,000 kilos we know were sold into hospitals, and all of a sudden some ends up on the street somewhere, you'd be able to take a look and say, no, this can't be, or we can track this all the way back. So it's an example of multiple organizations participating towards accomplishing some broader goal in a way that no single organization completely is trusted or reliant on that information. So I think anything really as it relates to cross-organizational compliance, this could be a good example for. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, certainly provenance or provenance in your supply chain is a key inquiry for a multitude of industries across numerous geographic areas. So the application immediately pops up in that area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to give a compliance example that's a little bit more near and dear to my heart. As a enterprise software provider for many, many years, we've had to go through auditing around the SSAE 16, the SAS, formerly SAS 70, I think the SSAE 18 now. And a lot of that even dealt with things as simple as HR processes and deactivating accounts, for example, access to customer data that an employee might have as soon as that employee is terminated. And now we're getting into more and more issues where so much of that data and accounts that employees have access to is shared across organizations with software as a service organizations. Now, if a blockchain, for example, could be a central source of truth for that, and I could have the various service organizations I'm using or that my employees might have accounts at, they could actually log their deactivations to the central blockchain, significantly easing the ability to audit whether or not that access was actually deactivated by a certain time, and even extending, I think, beyond where it's typically sitting within an organization's controls. I think most of the controls are focused, again, a bit more internally, and this really opens up the ability, I think, to have controls that span multiple organizations, but to be able to do it efficiently in a very trustworthy manner.
So your phrase, a central source of truth, is going to be critical, I think, for many different corporate disciplines, certainly in audit, internal controls, for my compliance folks, but it extends to such things as money laundering, export control, and a wide variety of areas. Having that single source of truth, as a lawyer and in compliance, I always said the three most important things in any compliance program were the following: document, document, document. But with blockchain and the usage you've described, it goes really even beyond the document, 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 because you have a single source of truth that is documented, but with transparency.
With transparency and with immutability. So the idea that it would be next to impossible to manipulate, I think, is also a key point on that.
So I'd now like to turn to the company Fluree, and I have to apologize for my Texas accent, where we say all the second syllables first, Fluree. But first, I'd like to ask, why do you guys have it as a public benefit corporation?
Well, as we have been involved in built software companies in the past, we always wanted to accomplish some greater good. So, it's either been something in the community or something helping technology individuals, but it's always been something we felt was very important. And as a growing organization, it's often difficult to maintain that, especially in the technology world where you're going out and you're looking oftentimes for venture capital. So you're starting to get a lot of kind of external investment interest with different priorities. And the public benefit corporation structure for an organization for us was just perfect because it really writes our public benefit cause directly into the corporate charter. It makes all the officers and directors responsible for it, in addition to responsibility for shareholder return. But it's kind of right in there and it can't easily be forgotten or removed. So we thought it was a good way of being able to set this up and make sure that it is something that stays with us throughout the life cycle of this business.
I'd now like to turn to information that's available on your website, and it's under a section entitled Composite Blockchain Consensus. And when I sat and read this in preparation for our podcast today, this struck me as something that was specifically designed for anti-corruption compliance. Now, obviously it wasn't, but the lesson I garnered from that initial inclination was this tool has an incredibly broad application. And it can be utilized literally in a multitude of ways, but it's going to bring I might even say certainty to the process. So I was wondering if you might just walk us through, first of all, what is composite blockchain consensus, and then the levels you've got up a private, federated cluster and fully decentralized.
Yeah, great. So right now there is a concept of really two types of blockchain technologies out there. There's what's generally referred to as public blockchain technology, and certainly Bitcoin fits in this, although Bitcoin's very focused only on currency transactions. But another pretty well-known blockchain that's focused a little bit more on smart contracts is in that category called Ethereum. And all of this information sits out in the public and is completely transparent, which is by design. It carries with it transparency, but it also carries with it a very high degree of consensus, meaning there is a massive network of computers across the globe that are all participating and sort of enforcing these blockchains. It also comes with very low transaction speeds and quite a bit of cost. So those are the trade-offs you're kind of making. And just to give a simple example, I'll use a Bitcoin example. It takes 10 minutes to confirm a Bitcoin transaction, which is what kind of makes it not really convenient to buy a cup of coffee with, for example, but maybe really convenient for settling a trade, which might otherwise take 3 days to fully resolve. Instead you could do something in 10 minutes. But it also comes with a very high cost. And one of the examples that I use, at least as it relates to Ethereum and storing data on the blockchain, is that 1 gigabyte of data, which isn't really that much by today's terms. Certainly you're buying computers that have tens of thousands of more storage than that for $500. So just 1 gigabyte of data costs today about $5 million to store on this public blockchain. So it's incredibly expensive. So if you're trying to store a bunch of digital signatures for contracts or compliance or things like that, it adds up to a lot of money. But that's kind of the public side. Those are the public blockchains that are available today. And then there's these private blockchains. And, IBM is certainly focusing on this. And the benefits there is more privacy, especially if that's what you want, and faster transaction times, because these blockchains are controlled by a set number of predefined entities, maybe 50 companies in your supply chain or 50 companies dealing with, compliance and regulation. And those are sort of the two extremes we have. And they're not really good choices for a lot of types of data. And you got to kind of go either or, and they're both completely different technologies. So one of our focuses with Fluree was that we want to bring and make blockchain technology more accessible to everything you do. And we want it to be able to solve this spectrum that aligns with the type of data you're storing. and be able to do it is essentially one database. So FlurreeDB is a database, and that's one of the things we like to mention about it, is that every application uses a database. So you don't really need to learn a completely new concept to take advantage of blockchain technology. But the second is that database that Fluree is using might actually exist in these multiple consensus levels. So where you want complete public visibility, and you're willing to pay a little bit extra in time and money for consensus, part of your data probably aligns with that. And that's great. You should store it there. There are certain types of data that is maybe being shared just amongst a group of supply chain or regulators that you're dealing with that's private. So that'll be cheaper. It'll have that privacy characteristic, but it'll also be somewhat faster. But then we feel like there's also this whole set of data, maybe internal employee data, that you don't want to share with any other organization. But you still want the benefits of blockchain and this idea that people in your IT organization really can't manipulate that data that's being stored, and it might be just internal employee records. But when you look at the database that's storing all the information of your company, you really have data that fits into each of these categories. So a real innovation that we're bringing here with this composite consensus level is that we say for the data, align the consensus levels of your data with what it needs, but have it act as a single system. So you really get the best of all the worlds.
That is really interesting, and I have to say, I'm going to have to sit back and think about the implications of that answer, because my mind is just spinning with how this can really impact in a very positive manner lots of different things, but specifically compliance going forward. So, Brian, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if anyone wanted to follow up on any of the information that you've given us. Could they go to the Fluree website, or what would be the best way to check out some of the things you've talked about today?
Well, the best way to get to all of our contact information, whether it's email or phone, is via our website, which is simply www.flur.ee. And we have a link there to numerous ways of getting in touch with us. And of course, there's a lot of information there about blockchain, FlurreeDB in particular, and how we're trying to make this technology a bit more accessible.
So I've been visiting with Brian Platz today, once again, fellow Michigan State Spartan, but also co-CEO and co-chairman of Fluree, a decentralized app platform that I think is going to transform not only how business applications are built, but also how the compliance profession is going to utilize data with the first true blockchain database. Brian, I really want to thank you for taking the time to visit with me, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. If you have listened to our podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate the podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only weekly podcast in compliance focusing on FCPA and all other forms of compliance. Also, if you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thank you again for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report, and I hope you'll join me next week, where I have a very special guest, Jerry Zach, the new CEO, interim CCO at the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, talks about his new role. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.